Happy Sunday, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is Talking Stuff. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Andrew Ellis. This is a surprise edition of the show and a surprise commitment for Ohio State on Sunday night as five-star defensive tackle Justin Scott, the nation's #1 ranked defensive tackle, commits to Ohio State. And Andrew, it probably feels like one of the more surprising commitments we've seen in quite some time. Not because it happened at all, but because the timing and just how quickly things have transpired from the end of his official visit last Sunday to now.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of some other recent examples that kind of fall in this same category. And I think I would probably put this one in a category of its own. It seemed like going into the official visit to Ohio State that the Buckeyes were running maybe 4th or 5th. And then coming out of the visit, just kind of thinking Notre Dame, Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia's still there, Miami's still there. But yeah, the timing of it all is certainly a surprise. So I'm with you on that.
If we go back to Wednesday's episode of Talking Stuff, I said then that I thought it was a two-team race between Ohio State and Michigan, with Notre Dame still fighting to get in the battle, primarily because of the impetus to be close to home for Justin Scott and his mother. Miami was obviously a very big threat and has been a big threat in this, but I think a lot of people assumed that was primarily because of NIL and everything else that Miami has to offer, being down in Florida. But there was always a push to be closer to home. And I said going into the official visit weekend that I thought Ohio State could present itself as a best case scenario to blend all the things, the football, the academics, the close to home, and the NIL opportunities. And it really does seem like that's what happened in the last 7 days, because Ohio State went from being, as you mentioned, on the periphery of this recruitment to being in the top 2 to now being the team he's committed to. And I think what it speaks to, Andrew, is like there was conversation about him maybe waiting until February to decide. This kid has never loved the recruiting process. And so when you find all the things that you're looking for in one spot and you get to be coached by Larry Johnson and compete for national championships, it seems like, it feels like it should be a no-brainer, but the recruitment has been, Ohio State's been so far on the outside of it that it is a shock.
Yeah, like I think early on in the process, there was some chatter about how he was high on Ohio State. That seemed like it was forever ago. And then there just wasn't a lot of talk about Justin Scott. And then, we talked about how busy the month of July is going to be. And he really wasn't one of those names that we talked about too much as a potential name to add to the commitment column. So I don't know. It just goes to show Larry Johnson knows what he's doing. Ohio State's as good as anyone in the country when it comes to hosting official visitors. And this, like you said, it's one of the more surprising developments in recent memory.
Yeah, that first visit to Ohio State was last October. He came on campus for the Ohio State-Wisconsin game, and there was some buzz. There was a palpable, like, oh, he really does like it here. But then he never made it back in the spring, and we saw Miami get involved, Georgia get involved. He had a commitment date set for January 31st, again, indicating that this is a kid who's wanted to be done with this process for a while. He held off from deciding in January because Larry Johnson went to a school and Trey Scott, the Georgia defensive tackle coach, went to a school and offered, and then Miami got involved. And then it felt like this was a commitment that could take a while, but now here we are. And as you mentioned, it's July the 3rd. Ohio State, we've had a list of guys that we have circled for this month, including, Marquise Lightfoot, who's making an announcement on Monday night. We'll see if that one still goes Ohio State's way. There's some buzz about Miami, as we get into the closing hours. But then there's Dylan Stewart and Edric Houston, who won't decide till August. But if you look at this potential defensive line haul now with Justin Scott, Jaden Jackson, Edric Houston, Dylan Stewart, you're talking about maybe the best single defensive line group that Larry Johnson's ever signed. And there have been so many people so quick to jump on his back and say the game has passed him by. But again, when he gets people on campus and he gets a chance to one-on-one with kids and get to know their family, his success rate is as good as anyone in the country.
Yeah, and it absolutely is shaping up to possibly be the best defensive line haul that he's ever had, and certainly one of the best in the country. We spent so much time talking about the defensive ends and the edge targets, and there haven't been quite as many names on the interior of the defensive line. And quite frankly, I didn't even really view Scott as a very realistic one until recently here. So, just a critical commitment. Michigan felt like they had a good chance there. Notre Dame. So it really doesn't get much bigger than this one for Larry Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a sweet taste to winning a Midwest battle when all three programs are on the rise and all playing good football. It's not the same as it was 5-7 years ago where it felt like Ohio State could just take whoever they wanted. This is a big win for Ohio State. It's a win over Al Washington, the former Ohio State linebackers coach, who's the defensive line coach at Notre Dame. It's a big win, obviously, over Michigan, who has been pushing him the idea that he's going to get better developed there and that they have better academics there. But clearly the combination of everything at Ohio State was the winner here. And it is a surprise. It is a shock, but it is real and it is spectacular for Ohio State. So, Andrew, I don't know how much, because he wasn't even a real possibility until the last week. Have you watched much of his film? What do you see? 6'5", 310 pounds, Justin Scott, St. Ignatius Prep in Chicago. What do you see on film that you like about him?
So I've watched his tape a little bit, but he moves. He doesn't move like he's as big as he is. He moves like somebody who's smaller than 6'5", 300+ pounds. A top 10 player in the country in the Rivals rankings, regardless of position. So that's, I don't know. I'm interested to see how they're going to use him, but he moves extremely well for somebody who is that large of a human being.
Yeah, he moves like a defensive end, and that's what you want when you get a guy like him. He's going to need to probably prove it against some better competition. St. Ignatius Prep is not playing the world beaters every week, but he is dominating, and that's what you want to see when you're the best player on the field. You want to see him just dominating people. I'd like to see it all 60 minutes, and he takes a couple plays off here and there, but who doesn't? This is a kid who's only been playing football really for 3 years, made his first varsity start as a sophomore, now at the end of his junior season as a top 10 player in the country, former soccer and basketball player, so he's got feet that are really good to work with. Ohio State's 4-man front, he's a perfect nose tackle in that system, and a guy that, in the comparison I wrote for ohiostate.rivals.com, which will be live on Monday morning, in the analysis, the only Ohio State defensive tackle I can really remember in my lifetime that has the traits he has and the size he has is Dan Wilkinson. And that was obviously a number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. So it's high praise and it's a high bar to clear. But if Justin Scott, knowing where he started 2 years ago, knowing where he is now, where he can be 3 years from now, 4 years from now, I don't think it's unrealistic to expect this kid to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And they've been bringing in some different types of interior defensive linemen. I'm not sure exactly where he fits. I love the Dan Wilkinson comparison for my Bengals, but yeah, I mean, he's just, what was it last year? How many they signed last year? Caden McDonald. There was a couple different guys they brought in.
Caden McDonald and Jason Moore, were the primary two. And then you had Will Smith, who was more of that 3 tech. But those guys were all very, very different. Like you had the 6'7", 295 pound Jason Moore. You have the 6'2", 330 pound Caden McDonald, and the 6'4", 260 pound Will Smith. And I think that what you get out of Justin Scott is a player that is the prototypical defensive tackle and what you want to build your defensive line around. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And if they can put some of those other, put the finishing touches on some of those other spots on the defensive line, whether it's a Dylan Stewart or a Marquise Lightfoot, I mean, it's like you said earlier, it's got the potential to be maybe the best that we've seen for Larry Johnson since his arrival in Columbus. Yeah, and that the next step in that happens on Monday, as I said, is Marquise Lightfoot gets ready to make his decision. Ohio State's been the presumptive leader in this battle since April. USC, Miami, Illinois have all been hanging around. Last couple days, there's been a little bit more smoke about the Hurricanes blowing into the way of the Buckeyes here to try to steal him away. It'll be interesting to see how that transpires. I don't have a particularly solid read on it yet, but it does feel like, I know that he's been saying all the right things to the people around Ohio State for the longest time. So we'll see if that's changed in the last day or not. But if he makes that decision on Monday, that's 2 Chicago area defensive linemen that, Larry Johnson reels in. As we mentioned, there's Dylan Stewart, the number 1 ranked defensive end in the country, Edric Houston, the number 2 ranked defensive end in the country, according to most people's minds, the different styles of guys. But again, when you're trying to build this defensive line, you got the 6'5", 310 pound, Justin Scott, and then you're aiming for the 6'3", 300 pound Jaden Jackson, 6'5", 255, and Dylan Stewart, 6'4", 275, and Edric Houston. Now you have some flexibility for Ohio State to go out and maybe find someone locally. Maybe find, you don't have to swing for the fences on every single prospect from here on out if Lightfoot goes a different way.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And, we've talked about it ad nauseum, just the misses from last cycle and how Larry Johnson needs to hit a grand slam for 2024. And it's shaping up that way. They got to put the finishing touches on some guys, which they failed to do last go around. But it's shaping up to be a hell of a bounce back for Larry Johnson this cycle.
Yeah, and it started tonight, Sunday night. Ohio State lands 5-star defensive tackle Justin Scott, the number 1 ranked defensive tackle in the country in the class of 2024. A massive upset for Ohio State on the recruiting trail as they pull off the win over Michigan, Notre Dame, and others. Head to ohiostate.rivals.com. Use promo code DTE30 to join myself and Andrew there as we break down what Justin Scott's commitment means for Ohio State, the Big Ten, and more. Other than that, Andrew, I guess it's back to the fireworks. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.